Morning, this is Brian. Today is Wednesday, October 30th, 2024, and I'm here in the Laguna Mountain Recreation Area. And as I'm shooting clips for an upcoming fall color, Southern California fall color episode, walking down this trail and I came across this magnificent Jeffrey pine. So it looks like today's gonna be another ode to Jeffrey pine, my third one this year. And that was more than 5 years after doing my spotlight video on this tree. I finally got it owed, but now this is my third one. Look at this Pinus Jeffrey here, right here. This is a magnificent specimen. They usually don't get quite this large here in the Laguna Mountains, but sometimes in these canyons, these can really, really shock the living core out of you. This is a pretty big Jeffrey pine right here. This is one of the larger ones I have seen here in the Laguna Range. This one's got a very girthy trunk on it, especially compared to the usual ones here. I'm assuming this one's probably about 130 to 150 feet tall, maybe a little bit shorter, but it is a magnificent tree, and it's pockholed by acorn woodpeckers stashing acorns. This is a granary tree, as we call them. They pock these holes, and then they stuff these acorns, usually California black oak acorns, in them. But when I saw this tree when I was hiking down this trail looking for fall color footage, I just basically got blindsided by this Jeffrey pine. This is a magnificent specimen here. Now, trees this size are a lot more common, say, up in the Laguna Mountain. I mean, not in the Laguna, I'm in the Laguna Mountains, but places like the San Bernardino Mountains, and sometimes in parts of the San Gabriel Mountains, up towards Kern, Tulare County, and then up in the Sierras. Yeah, trees this big are pretty common. Here in the Laguna Mountains, they're not so common. These ones are a little more typical size here. But you just look at the girth on this tree. Here are my feet and the trunk for some perspective. This is a magnificent tree. This is an absolute stunningly tall, beautiful, lofty tree. Now, I've seen Jeffrey pines much taller than this even here in Southern California, but this one has the advantage of girth. But yeah, it does definitely have some height. This is a magnificent Jeffrey pine. Could not help but get some footage of this tree for you to see. I don't even know the name of the trail, but I took it coming down from Wooded Hill Road. I'll try to see if I can approximate where this is, but if you want to see this tree for yourself, but just look at how stunningly beautiful this tree is. Big, tall, lofty. The branches don't start till probably about halfway or so up the trunk. This is definitely probably what trees were more like back before the drying and logging happened. Probably Mount Laguna probably had much larger trees back in the day, because most of this is not old growth. A lot of this is newer, younger growth forest. And that's why these trees haven't had a chance to get as big as this. But just look at just magnificent this Jeffrey pine is. I just could not help but get this documented. So I'm gonna go take a few pictures of it, and then I'll go check out some of these younger Jeffrey pines, and we'll just take some appreciation for this. So yeah, I just cannot help but admire this. I took a couple pictures of this and some of the neighboring trees too. I just can't get over this. This is an absolutely stunning tree. And these younger ones here could be on their way to that. Another thing I always love is the really sweet smell that emanates from the bark of Jeffrey pines. You can tell this one here has seen some fire damage. You can see a little fire burning, a little bit of fire scarring on the bottom of that one, but not enough to even get through the bark. It just got the outer, singeing the outer parts of the bark on this younger Jeffrey pine. So you can tell it was more of a ground fire that hit here probably some years ago. But yeah, just look at the difference too between these younger, more furrowed Jeffrey pines with these thick furrows, ridges, and crevices. So you see here. And then that's a younger growth tree. And this one here, it's kind of hard to see the contrast because of especially because of the pock marks by the birds. But this one's plated out. This one's got wide bark plates that are almost ponderosa colored. This one kind of has a bit of a yellowish hue. Now a lot of times Jeffrey pine, you're expecting more of a cinnamon to brownish hue, but sometimes on older trunks, sometimes they can widen out and even turn yellow, like they're fairly close relative to the ponderosa pine. So when that happens, if you really want to know what you're looking at, you need to examine the cones. Now, a couple things to examine if you're trying to separate Jeffrey pine from ponderosa pine, and sometimes it can be very tricky. Very tricky. I've had times where I come up to a tree, including one here in Mount Laguna, and I could have sworn it was going to be a ponderosa pine, but once I came up to it, I saw it had yellow bark plates. Small, square, almost squarish yellow bark plates, sometimes common on really fat-trunked older ponderosas. But I examined all the cones on the ground, and looking at the cones very carefully, and they all had indications of Jeffrey pine. None of them had the indication that it was a ponderosa. So if you're trying to differentiate these two, the cone test is usually a pretty good method. It's not always foolproof, it depends, but Jeffrey pines generally have prickles that face down at the end of the cone scale, down and sometimes backwards, so a lot of times when you pick them up, you don't even feel them. And ponderosas typically have prickles that come down and face out, and you feel the prickles underneath them on your skin. Now, that's not always 100%. I've been following this one botanist here in Southern California named Tom Chester, and he does note that a lot of trees that most people would swear to be Jeffreys would be ponderosas, and who would swear that they were ponderosas were Jeffrey pines. So a couple clues he put out to help even further differentiate the two, beyond just looking at the cones, prickles, whether they stick down back or down and out, is looking at the color of the trees. Now these trees kind of have a slight grayish hue to them. These are Jeffrey pines. They got grayish hues to them. Slight grayish. They're predominantly a medium green with just a little touch of gray. And that's kind of similar to coulter pines, which also have grayish hues, sometimes a little bit more so than even Jeffrey pines. But that's where coulters and Jeffreys could be kind of confused until you look at the cones in the trees and see those magnificent, huge ones with the huge cones with the big claws that stick out of them that could fall and really injure you badly, which are coulter pines. And then the smaller yet still decent sized cones of the Jeffrey. So yeah, grayish hue. So yeah, looking at the bark is not always a telltale sign that you're looking at a ponderosa or Jeffrey, and I have learned that through closely scrutinizing these trees when I see them in the field. But one clue you can look at on the cones themselves is looking at the color of the upper parts of the scales, which I'm touching with my finger here, the upper part versus the lower part of the scale. The upper part of the scale won't have much of a color difference from the lower part of the scale. If you're looking at a Jeffrey pine, that's what you would normally see. Similar shade of darkness on top to that of which is on the bottom. Now, for a ponderosa pine, typically the cones will be smaller and the underside of the cone scale will be darker than the top side of the cone scale. So Hopefully that helps a little bit with some of the confusion, because a lot of times I literally have to examine cones on the ground, because there are places where ponderosas and Jeffreys do grow together. I've seen them growing together, and I've had to scrutinize very carefully and make sure I know what cone fell from what tree. Because that's another thing you got to look at, is what cones are falling from what trees, especially if they're mixed close together. That's what you're going to want to look and see. Now, again, generally, Jeffrey pine cones are larger. This is not even a full-size cone. The bottom scales are missing. But they tend to be this size or even a little bit larger. Ponderosa cones are typically much smaller. Typically. And again, prickles that face down and out, darker undersides for the scales. But yeah, just look at that. What a beautiful tree. Let me just get a couple more pictures of these trees around here, and then I'll just end this off with an appreciative note on the beautiful Jeffrey pine. So, just a few notes. Left on this ode video to Jeffrey pine. Just a few informational notes. You're much more likely to come across Jeffrey pine than you are ponderosa. Here at Mount Laguna, I think I've only seen one ponderosa pine. It was planted along a nature trail near the visitor center, I believe, if I remember correctly. But yeah, you're here, especially here at Mount Laguna. Your big pines are the Jeffrey pines. Occasionally you'll come across incense cedar, and I've never seen sugar pine here. But yeah, Jeffrey pine and sugar pine are very easy to tell apart. Sugar pine has needles and bundles of 5. Shorter needles, often very sprawled out branches with really long, relatively softer cones with no prickles on them on sugar pines. And Jeffrey pines have longer needles and bundles of 3. Their bark smells like vanilla or smells like a bakery. And sometimes sugar pines can just get to absolutely monstrous size. But yeah, look at that magnificent tree. That is just an absolute stunningly beautiful specimen. I'm so glad I saw this. I don't know if I was going to come this far on the last video I was recording, a segment for my fall color video. And then I saw this out of the corner of my eye. I was thinking, yeah, it's time to do a third ode to this tree. So yes, definitely a tree that is extremely common, probably the most common tall pine here in Southern California's mountains. And a tree that on a warm day you can appreciate the fragrance of its bark. So there you have it. Pinus Jeffrey, the Jeffrey pine. Absolutely magnificent specimen. Just can't get enough of this tree, and I just had to get this on video. I just had to show this off. I just wanted you guys to see, even here in the Laguna Mountains, we can get some pretty large trees if we know where to look. Yeah, a lot of times if you're here in Mount Laguna and you're looking for larger Jeffrey pines, on that note, where you're going to want to go is you're going to want to find canyon bottoms. Canyon bottoms in the forest, where it's forested with pines and oaks and everything. A lot of times in these canyon bottoms where you're going to find the largest specimens of Jeffrey pines here. So there you go. Pinus Jeffrey, the Jeffrey pine. Another appreciative look at another tree that is definitely well worth being appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my next ode video.